This company's never been more profitable.
You mean hugely profitable?
I like it.
DavePorter.com presents The Profitable Cleaner, a podcast on commercial cleaning sales and entrepreneurship. The one podcast that's not afraid to discuss real sales strategies with real cleaning professionals that produce real profits and real results.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Profitable Cleaner podcast. I am super excited for today's episode. One, we have my co-host back, Angel Sandoval, now a married man. I don't know if he's produced a episode since he's been married, so the married version of Angel Sandoval. But more importantly and more interesting, the reason why you're here and listening is to learn from the one and only Michelle Lefever, president of Expand Your Edge. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
James and Angel, I'm doing awesome. And I'm so excited to be here. It's so great to meet you guys and have the opportunity to be here with you on your podcast. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm just thrilled.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump right into it. So I want to give people a little bit of insight on who they're speaking with or who they're hearing from, I should say. You talk about expanding your edge. I know you're a leadership coach, you're a consultant, you're a Birkman consultant, which I know we're going to dive deep into. Tell people kind of who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, my sort of sphere of expertise is helping entrepreneurs transform their businesses into permanently profitable businesses so that they can basically that supports their lives without sort of sacrificing it, and so they can focus on what matters to them the most. And so I do that in a few different ways. Using the tools that I have. The Birkman, I'm a certified profit first professional, so it's just sort of look at like what the hierarchy of needs are for their business and sort of hone in on that to support them as best I can.
Okay, let's actually start there before we talk Birkman and personality traits. Explain to people listening right now, Profit First. Obviously, Profit First is actually one of the probably more mentioned books on this show. I think it's up there with a few leadership books that have been mentioned and the Bible, of course. But multiple people have mentioned Profit First. There's obviously a Profit First program and people like you that are Profit First experts. Tell everyone listening what that is and what that means.
Great question, James. It's such the book is written by Mike Michalowicz, who is kind of I just think he's a very sort of prolific writer and entrepreneur. And he builds these like simple systems without them being so simplistic that really help sort of get to the root of what a lot of entrepreneurs sort of face in terms of challenges. And the Profit First methodology specifically addresses cash flow. And personally, in my own business, I actually read the book back in 2018, and I just moved back to the States from Australia, so I was just rebuilding my business here. And I read the book, and I was still too new, so I was like, "This is such a great system, but I don't know if I'm sort of ready for it." And I'm kicking myself because I really wish that I had done it then, because cut to like till last year. In the summer, I was like, I was noticing with my clients that, with the shifts with the market and everything, they were experiencing some significant cash flows, at various stages, whether they're multi-6 or multi-7 figure businesses, like the challenges were the same. And I thought, and it started to have a ripple effect on my business. So I'm like, okay, I just needed to sort of double down and dive in. I had been sort of swimming around the thought of really learning the methodology myself personally. And so I inquired about, getting certified. It's primarily for bookkeepers and accountants because it's, but because it's behavior based, it was a very unique fit for me with the Birkman because the Birkman is a behavioral based assessment. So I could really see the synergy of using the two together. And so I went through the process to get certified. And so it's a really powerful tool to help entrepreneurs. Especially if they're like the biggest challenges is like if you don't have a cash reserve for 2 to 3 months, up to 6, even 12 months, you can really run into a lot of problems, right? Or so if you're paycheck to paycheck, or you don't have enough for your quarterly tax payments, it can be so stressful. And so that's that basic sort of foundational need. And so I went through the process and got certified, and I've been rolling it out, helping my clients roll it into their business. And it's just been a game changer. Yeah. And the process itself is that Mike outlines in the book is it's very straightforward. Like you can literally like implement it by reading the book. It's but the accountability piece and the implementation is hard without a guide to sort of walk you through the steps. But the gist of it is that you set up sort of 5 basic foundational accounts. So real revenue, owner's comp, an account for profit, and operational expenses and tax. Yeah. Okay. And so you're basically, it's like a way to sort of bucket your accounts into those quadrants. And so the philosophy comes from, he uses Parkinson's law as the example of why this system works. And Parkinson's law is about like the time. Angel, do you know Parkinson's law?
Little bit. It just came up recently, and I don't know why, but I can't remember why it came up.
So it's basically use the resources and the time allotted. So if you think of, applying it to time, like, so my son's in high school right now. So if he's got 2 weeks to do an assignment, he will take 2 weeks to do an assignment.
There you go. Okay.
And so Mike's applied it to, in a really brilliant way to sort of managing cash. And so for cash, it's like, if you've got, if all your money from your business is going into one account and you see, whoa, I've got lots of money here. You just, we're sort of spending it without a lot of intention, like thinking about, oh, I've got quarterly payments I need to sort of earmark this money for. And so we can sort of run into a lot of issues there, especially if we're not like high numerical, or really like if numbers aren't our love language, which that's really for me, you know what I mean? So it's a way to sort of use your behavior, but in a way that serves you versus sort of puts you into those precarious situations where you don't have enough cash in your business.
So before we turn this into like a profitability conversation or an accounting conversation. Tell us a little bit about the Birkman, because I have a few questions already based on what you just said. But yeah, tell everybody what the Birkman is, a little bit more on that portion real quick. That way we can get into the good stuff.
Yeah. So the Birkman is it's a behavioral assessment. It looks at sort of our perceptions. It's a perception analysis, and it identifies your strengths, your underlying needs, what you need to be successful in your role or in life in general. There's so many different applications that you can do. It's a very deep tool that is used for personal development, interpersonal, sort of diving deep into team alignment, interpersonal dynamics. The applications to it are quite endless. There's very few sort of on the market that go that deep. And so it's very comprehensive. It's like drinking through a fire hose when you get a review.
I have it.
Yep. But it's very powerful. And so it's what you, like with any tool, it's like what you do with it that matters the most. And so it's like a shot of, of adrenaline, of awareness initially. And then it's like,
what's the difference between that and the disc? Why do you like Birkman more than disc?
I mean, disc.
Are you familiar with disc?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not certified in that or anything, but when I was working in healthcare, they use the disc quite a bit. And I've got colleagues that use the disc. Disc is a great profile. The Birkman goes underneath and to identify behaviors you can't actually see. And so it becomes a really good tool for whether you're, as part of your recruitment process, if you're trying to create alignment from a behavioral base, with your values, you're drawing in the right people, the A players, to make sure that they're, sort of fit for your culture. Birkman is a really good tool to help with that. And
So all right, let's get into it. I'm excited. So basically, you hit on two things. You hit on profitability, like the profit first, right? And then you hit on Birkman. So you said that since you knew Birkman and then you learned profit, you realize that a lot of it is just a behavioral based, right? Like the profitability. So like the profitability of would you say that the profitability of a business is like a reflection of the behavior of the leader in the business or the financial person, like my CFO or?
Yeah. Okay. So, Angel, that's really insightful. So yeah, what I see is typically like wherever there's challenges in the business, if it, depending on, so if you go to the top, usually it's a reflection or an extension of what is sort of potentially going on with the owner. You know what I mean? So if, and sometimes, and it shows up in a sort of a neutral, objective way on the Birkman. Not all owners want to sort of go there. It's more like the external focus on like, help me fix the problems out here. I've got some team dynamics and whatnot, but more often than not, I'm like, it usually is sort of, it rolls down from the top.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's like
so if someone right now hearing this is like, oh man, I'm struggling. Cause okay, so we're in the commercial cleaning
Yes.
industry, right? Margins are already low as it is. But the more we talk with people, there's a huge spectrum of like financial literacy in a lot of them. Like you see some that are like, yeah, I'm going to win these contracts with lower margin, but somehow they have when you bring it all the way down, they're more profitable than someone that's going after a huge margin and somehow still losing money.
Yeah.
Or getting down. So you're saying that could be, not that it's a definite, but that could be, or most likely is a reflection of the personality of the leadership team that you have built that focuses on finances and
yeah. I mean, I would sort of qualify it more as the behavior, sort of like those underlying, what they're naturally drawn to, what, sort of, on the Birkman, it measures interest, like what gives you energy, what doesn't give you energy. And one of the scores is actually numerical. So if you've got a high numerical score, like numbers are really easy for you. It's like you think, breathe, sleep numbers. So it's kind of like, again, like your love language. And then if you have a low score, it's not necessarily a reflection of skill, but it just means like you prefer to sort of stay high level with it. Sort of like, and it, looking at your P&L or your balance sheet or a cash flow analysis is not as comfortable. It's not as natural until there's an issue, So yeah, the reflection is, it's more of a compass than a map. Okay. So it's like giving a signal of like, for me, like if I'm hearing about something that someone's having some challenges with their cash flow or sort of figuring out like, do I have enough money to hire someone in the business? It's like, I'm going to look at the Birkman to see like how that is actually showing up for them personally. And then, if they're open to it, then we can kind of go underneath and sort of work that out. But the Profit First program actually works with that behavior. So it's like you can basically fix the problem by using Profit First. But then there's the deeper issue of like, okay, well, how's that actually translating to their personal finances, right? Like, yeah. And so
and I think you even said it, like you need the accountability and the guide, right? It's one thing to know that this is what I do, or this is this is what I need to follow on Profit First. But then understanding that Birkman, it's almost like you can create, like you said, a compass. I really like the compass idea, almost like a signal. It's like a signal that tells you, hey, even though this is what you're trying to accomplish, this person is more this way. So they might get in the way, or you need to like reel them back in, right? Like you need to be on it. It's interesting you say that. Now I'm looking. So for those that don't know, I'm looking at I have a Birkman test. Now I'm looking at it and I just realized, hold on, you just said something that just tripped me out. So it's funny. So if James and I are trying to, let's say we're growing the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says here, restlessness is one of the thing it measures, right?
Yep.
It says how you prefer to focus attention or change focus and seek varied activities. So if James and I were to hire, like, let's say this is not me, let's say this is someone else. If James and I wanted to hire a finance guy, like our bookkeeper, let's say our CFO or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it said here on the restlessness, their usual behavior that on the 1 concentrates attention well, and then on the 99 likes a variety of simultaneous tasks. I'm at a 90 out of 99 on that,
mm-hmm.
right? But if we're hiring someone and we get this from there, right? Would they be an ideal CFO? Based on, because they're not really going to be focused on like the one project behind the computer that I'm giving them, right? They're trying to, and which makes a lot of sense, they're trying to do multiple things at multiple times, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's a great question, Angel. And so it's like there's a couple layers to that, right? So in terms of, so when you're looking for someone that's going to fit the CFO role, yes, you definitely want someone that knows the numbers, is really good at what they do. So then we kind of look at the numerical score, which is in the interest category. Typically what I see is like, CFOs, COOs, accountants have very high numerical scores. CPAs, not always, but in general, they're very comfortable with numbers. That's kind of like where they live.
Yeah.
Okay. But so when you look at the components, which is what you're looking at with restlessness, that's a score. Also, yes, you like a lot of variety. You kind of like, you're able to pivot pretty easily, but there's also a lot of flexibility built in there. So if something comes up, like you can adjust your focus. Obviously we know that multitasking is a myth, but it's like, it's a skill to be able to be responsive in the moment, right? And adjust. So depending on your culture, you might want someone that can do that and also is good at the numbers. So it's kind
Because
of
the
coming back to
Birkman breaks down deeper, huh? I just realized I just showed you that, but there's interest, there's the other. Okay, gotcha. So what does the Birkman break into? Like that personality. Like, let's say I were to take it right now, or I'm listening to this and I'm like, I really want to do this for my leadership team. What is it going to break down? Is it just interest? Do you know what those breakdowns are?
Yeah. So there's
Awesome.
three main categories on the signature report, which is what you have in your hand. There's also some advanced reports depending on what the company needs to be looking at. But on the signature report, it's going to break you into sort of three main categories. So at 30,000 feet, which is the map. Okay. So you'll see that in the lower right corner. That's going to basically look at your behavior from a very high level of what your interests are in general. And so Birkman breaks us up into sort of four main categories. Red are people that are sort of the doers, action takers, implementers. The green are all about people, influence, motivating, inspiring others. The blues are the thinkers, creators, and sort of like all about strategy, big picture. And then the yellows are all about systems and processes and sort of analyzing. Okay, so that takes you up to a really high level. So that's a really powerful tool to map out your leadership teams, kind of looking where everybody is. And so you can see sort of where they sort of group, and if there's any boxes or squares that you don't have. So sometimes I'll work with teams and they're really heavy on the green, really heavy in blue, but they don't have a lot of implementers and like people are taking action, or they don't have any yellow. So systems are an issue. There's a team that I work with now that they're blue, green, and red, but there's no yellow. And that's where they struggled. It's like with systems and processes and like doing, sort of repetitive tasks and sort of analyzing the data there. So that's a really helpful way to use it. So that's the map. And then we look at the interests. So the interests take you to 10,000 feet. Okay. So the interests, a good way to think about the interests in terms of energy, right? Like things that energize you. Birkman's not measured on a intensity, on a grading scale. It's an intensity scale. So we look for the really high scores. So anything 70 above are things that tend to give us energy, like charge us up, like, yeah, we don't mind doing it, right? It energizes us to do it. Yeah. And it's not a reflection of skill again, but if we're interested in it, we're probably going to put in the time and build out the skills. And then anything sort of lower than 30, these are the areas where, there's a lot of talk about, sort of focusing on your strengths, what you're good at, what things that sort of, but on the interest categories, if you're looking at those lower ones, again, like coming back to a numerical, like if I'm a low numerical, it's like, yes, I don't want to be, I don't want to be a CPA or an accountant or even a CFO, but it's like, I still need to know my numbers, So it's like, I don't want to like our natural tendency is to like put it over here. Right. And so it becomes sort of a blind spot, but it's like bringing it in the front. We don't have to like be the best at it, but we just want to be aware of it. And so it becomes very intentional, how to like use those scores and how they start to layer on each other. And then at the ground level is the components. So this really, Angel and James, is where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so it's when those interests, the needs, and the stress behaviors that can come when the needs and the environment don't match. Okay, so I skipped ahead a little bit. So on the map, we've got the categories, right? And so you'll see 4 symbols. The star is going to show your interests. That's what we're talking about now, with things that give you energy, things that sort of balance your energy, and things that drain your energy. The diamond will show your usual strengths. Okay, your usual behavior, which can actually be your strengths. Okay, when everything's going well, this is what I can count on James and Angel to be sort of coming from, that place. Okay. And then there's a circle and a square. So the circle is what you need to be successful. Okay. So that's the underlying thing. And that's what's really helpful with the Birkman is like, with these other profile tests and sort of analysis, like you don't necessarily see that. It's like you're seeing their strengths, you're seeing what motivates them, you're seeing, stress behaviors that can show up too, like if things aren't, aligned with what they need. But this dives really deep, like what I need to be successful in what environment, this is a match. So as a leader, it's really important to sort of know that so you can meet, your team where they are.
Awesome.
And
Because now you're creating incentives and rewards based on per person versus as an individual, right? Because now you're looking for those things. It's interesting. I'm gonna have to dive deep on mine and read this. I have a question, unless you do, James, before I jump, kind of keep going. So obviously, like again, I'm staring at mine, and I know like there's a beauty to personality tests and knowing them deeply. Why do you think most people are not doing this though? Because it's funny enough, like I've been in a lot of companies, even here with us, like we've talked about it, we've never pulled the trigger though. Is it a lack of education? Is it a lack of just knowing how valuable it is, or is it a lack of marketing by the Birkman marketing team or whatever, where we actually don't know until somebody else from a higher up brings it? Like why are people not using it? Because now I'm reading it and I'm like, this is my book. Like if someone's my leader, like this is the book that you need to follow. And it's kind of weird because even I'm looking at it, I'm like, I would say that I love money as an incentive, but then I'm reading this and I'm like, you're right. I would rather have quality time with my leader versus money, right? Which is really weird for me because I'm like, what? That doesn't but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right. So like my incentive, well, actually this one's weird. My incentive says usually I'm 25, but my needs are 71. So does that mean that I show that I'm not really like I don't need an incentive to work hard, but in reality I do?
Oh, no. So
Okay.
that lower score is just all about like you're very, it suggests that you're very team oriented, like what's good for the company is good for, but that underlying need is, it's important to have that sort of individual sort of recognition or compensation. And so then it's like, you're going to be sort of and that's a very dominant sort of social pattern is like, hey, I'm all about the team, but let's talk about how this looks for me. Right. Like, and as a founder and a co-business owner, it's like, that's important, right? It's like, why are we here to create? Like, it's obviously to serve and make a difference, but it's also, there's the financial piece, so it's just,
100%.
it just sort of brings that into light. But to answer your question, Angel, it's like, it can be a combination of things. The Birkman it's an investment. And so it's something that, and Birkman is international. So it's a very widely used, so there's millions of people and companies in the database. So, but it's sort of on par. It's a very robust assessment. So to use it, like, growth-minded leaders are looking for tools like this, especially that are really invested in sort of developing their teams. I find that the leaders that are interested in using it are really, they really support their team members' growth and their own personal growth. And so, and they see the benefit of having that as a leadership development tool. So if they're looking at sort of bringing up their growing leaders into sort of higher positions, or if there's interpersonal challenges that they're experiencing on a team, it's a very helpful tool to sort of bring objectivity back to it, because there can be a lot of reactionary behavior. So again, like what I was saying, like when the needs and the environment don't match, or if I'm coming from one side of the perception spectrum and someone else is somewhere else, I might clash with them because there's a gap of perceptions between us. But it's like a way to sort of disarm it and diffuse it in a way that feels sort of safe, and so that we can have the conversation, we can agree to disagree, but it's coming from respect and sort of being able to sort of hear the other person where they're at. But a lot of times that gets lost in translation because there can be a lot of charge that comes through. And so we kind of go into those counterproductive negative behaviors, which the Birkman shows very clearly how that shows up. So it can be really helpful like that. And in terms of like how, yeah, it's really like a lot of times, like people will hear about the Birkman from someone like, hey, this is a great tool, because there's so many out there.
Yeah, that is true.
But once they start, like people have their preferred method of, of assessing their teams, for Birkman is just one of many options. It's a very powerful one. The Hogan's another one that sort of is on par with Birkman in terms of its depth and analysis. And also, not all the tests are valid and reliable. Birkman is. It's been scientifically proven, and tested over and over again, its validity. So not many can say that. So that's why it's such a powerful tool.
I have two questions here for you, Michelle. The first one, I'd be curious to learn what got you so passionate and into like the Birkman testing, and what drove you there, right? Like what in your life changed to make you dive deep into the Birkman? Maybe I'll let you answer that, and then I'll ask a follow-up to that.
Okay. That's a great question, James. So I was very fortunate that when I was starting out early in my career, I worked I've got a degree in kinesiology and exercise, and I worked as an exercise specialist for many years at a hospital-based wellness center. And one of my closest friends from college, her mom was a Birkman consultant. This is a long time ago. Okay. And I was sort of paying my dues and sort of moving up the ranks within this hospital-based clinic. And she offered to sort of take me through the Birkman, because she could see that I was, very driven, and I just always wanted to sort of be better and do better. And so she took me through it. So she introduced me to the tool at a very young age. And I honestly didn't know the power of what I was holding in my hand at the time. I thought, this is really cool. It's really interesting. It's like, how did it extract this from those questions? I mean, it's kind of mind blowing once you experience it. And so I had it printed out, and I kind of tucked it in a folder, and I would refer to it over the years, right? Like in my personal life, relationships, like again, there's so many applications to it. And it was the results stay very stable over time. If you are, unless you're going through like something very significant, like a traumatic event or a life change, like then the scores can actually shift. And what I've found is, like, if you're doing really deep work on yourself, it can also have an impact on the scores. And so I used it throughout my life, and it became just sort of a really sort of helpful. Again, it's like a tool is just a tool until you actually really start to use it. And then when the opportunity presented itself in 2014, I was living in Australia at the time with my family, and thinking about what I wanted to do, because my kids were a little bit older. I was ready to sort of go back into the workforce. I had sort of left it to, have kids and raise them. And the Birkman was always on my mind. Like, I thought, I loved when I worked in healthcare and held various director level positions. I was always the first to raise my hand when the consultants came in and were offering sort of coaching. I was so into it. And they would do different assessments. So that's when I learned about the DISC, Myers-Briggs and various other ones. But none of them, from my perspective, again, this is just my personal opinion, held a candle to the Birkman with how the depth that it went to. And so when I had the opportunity, I noticed that there was a certification opportunity in Singapore. So I flew to Singapore in September of 2014. I got certified, and then I just started from there.
Awesome.
And then the crazy part, James, is that when I moved back to Colorado, the person who introduced it to me, my friend's mom, she was still a consultant. And ironically, so we live sort of on the same block now. And when I came back, she's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she was always sort of a mentor for me anyway. But what are you doing now? I'm like, you wouldn't believe it, but I got certified in Birkman, and I'm using the Birkman. She's like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And so that sort of planted a seed with her. And 6 months later, she was kind of moving towards sort of retiring. And she's like, "Why don't you come with me on one of these trips? Let me see what you can do." And so that sort of, when I moved back, I was just sort of getting my feet on the ground again. And so I started to, as she sort of phased out, I phased in, and, with her top clients. And that was just such a gift have that opportunity. I mean, I'll never forget that piece. And she saw, she watched me and sort of had guided me. And so I learned a lot from her in that process. But so the Birkman's always sort of been my go-to, and it's my foundational go-to when I'm working with people, because I just know the power in it. It's just, it's something it's hard to put into words until you experience it.
No, it's awesome. I'm like, I need to go take this test because 2 of the 3 people.
Yeah, we'll get it. Yeah, we'll get it through Michelle here. Oh, you have one?
I just have one last question, I guess, for you here, Michelle. I want to talk about like rolling this out. So like this like sounds great. You get really excited. You want to learn more about yourself. You want to learn more about your team. So like once companies get the results, whether that's with the team, their leadership, whatever, now what? Like, so then like, what's the actual, like what's the next steps once you get the information, you get the data, a little bit more clarity, then what happens? What do you typically see happen, evolve once they understand each other a little bit more?
Yeah, James, another great question. It really depends on the company and their needs and sort of what they're wanting to use it for. If it's used as sort of a team alignment and development, so that could look is a couple different ways. Typically, what I see is that the executives go through it, and then that can actually lead to sort of one-on-one coaching, especially like depending on how, if they're looking at sort of leveling up their own leadership skills and sort of moving into another level. It's a really powerful sort of stepping stone into that. And then it's like rolling it out to the teams. And for the teams, that can look more like in sort of group format. So it's like the reviews, it really depends on how far they want to go with it. But it's typically like, doing group facilitation, sort of taking them through it. So there's like, this is how we're working together. This is how we can work better together. Here's our strengths. Here's how we complement each other. And then it sort of rolls into sort of using it as a recruitment tool, sort of to bring in new players, like how they're going to fit in. What behaviors are we looking for? How does that align with our values? So it's like there's a lot of different pieces, a lot of parts to it. But the main thing is like having the owner sort of go through it themselves so they can kind of really experience. And then from that, a lot of conversation comes like, oh, wow, I can see that, my VPs could really benefit from this, and probably some side coaching just because they're having some challenges with managing their team, or there's a lot of different applications to it. Does that help answer your question?
No, absolutely. I was just wondering, okay, you got the paper like Angel has, now what? So awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think it's definitely like it's a personality test, but it's like a insight into the individual. I have 2 questions before, because I know we're running into time here, but I have 2 questions that are not specifically Birkman.
Okay.
They're just fun questions.
Okay.
That have to do with personality. What makes up somebody's personality?
Oh, God.
What would you say makes up somebody? Like, what are some top 3 major factors that make up somebody's personality? I'm assuming like growing up, right? The nurture, like how you grew up, what you experienced in life, culture, right? Is there anything else that, because I think like it's cool to know your personality, but it's, I don't know. Now I'm like trying to go deeper. I'm like, what made this guy in this report? So for people right now, how people always say, like as a leader, or even with your partner, you're just like, that's just their personality. When I hear that statement, like that's just the personality. What does personality entail usually? What are some influences for personality?
Okay, so
That's
Angel,
a loaded
that's
question. So be
that's
ready.
really, yeah. And I'm not a psychologist, so and the Birkman actually doesn't go in. So the behavior pieces, right, especially like the counterproductive stress behaviors that can be visible when the needs in the environment don't match. Like Birkman actually doesn't go into sort of how that came to be. It's more like,
Gotcha.
Here's what's happening. What do we need to sort of help this person get back to their center, so they're working out of their strengths again.
I think what you just said right there is huge, because I think sometimes even us as leaders, like sometimes when I see someone act a certain way, like my first go-to is let's get to the root of it. And I think in a professional setting, the bigger your company gets, the least to the root you can get to. Does that make sense? Because I think what you just said is interesting. Getting to the root is more like past traumas, how they grew up, what's going on, beliefs, perceptions. But it's almost like the Birkman lets me, like where they're at, lets me meet them where they're at now, and be able to like influence the situation instead of fixing them internally. It's more, influence the situation to like provide almost like a better environment for them, which is really interesting. Now I don't have to get into like deep psychology conversations, which happens a lot because I'm not a licensed psychologist. We're not licensed. But like you said, now it's like, hey, instead of doing that, this is where they're at. This is how you meet them. Let's influence the situation through understanding their personality. So it's almost like a cheat code. Sounds like a cheat code, actually. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and not that, I mean, that work that you're talking about is very important, right? Because that's also like something like it, but it's really, that becomes really up to the individual if they want to go that deep and sort of find someone to help them sort of support that. But one thing I would say, Angel, that, the Birkman does sort of I look at it as like the Birkman sort of identifies your baseline operating system. Okay. And so when you go into stress, negative behavior, or counterproductive behavior, then you're dropping into what I refer to as sort of your lower operating system. Okay. And so that could be another way, coming back to your question. I mean, that could be, this is going down the rabbit hole a little bit, but sort of the lower self, the shadow self, like how that sort of manifests itself. Okay. And then, but what we want to be looking towards is how to use the Birkman to sort of elevate, to access the higher states. So the best version of ourselves, the higher self, the real self. And so it's like to do that. Have you guys read the book Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield?
Mm-hmm.
You have? Oh, so good. So it talks about amateurs versus pro. And so, and so the amateurs are comfortable sort of staying in their lane, right? In that comfort zone, because the Birkman will show you where the edges are, and where the edges are is the resistance. And so to go pro, you need to be able to work through the resistance, not push through it, not push it down, not power through, which like you got to push through but that's counterproductive because that creates more stress and we're using more energy. We're depleting our will power when we're actually doing that. So when we're looking at like those higher elevated states, it's like, that's the core of the work that I do when I'm doing the one-on-one coaching, is I help leaders access that more on a consistent basis. And I use the Birkman to say, here's where you are, here's where your edges are. And that's hence the name of my company, Expand Your Edge, and sort of teach them how to sort of lean into that and expand into that. So that those challenges, which are inevitable, are going to come up in business, right? At every level of every stage that you're at. But the suffering is not. Okay. So the suffering, we create our own suffering when we go into those reactive states. And it's like, it's hard for us to come out of it, and so we need help to come out of it, but to be able to access that higher level, that higher operating system, it's a practice. Okay.
100%.
So, and Stephen talks about that in the book. It's like to be able to sort of do something. And Stephen Covey's actually also talked about sharpening the saw in your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of the self. So that's really where the deep work comes in. And for your listeners that are like, they all seem very growth, oriented and growth minded. It's like, you just need to have a willingness. And it's like, if you're seeing like sort of these patterns sort of show up and, that are starting to repeat themselves, or it's like these challenges come up, it's like, you're trying to get to the root, Angel, right? It's like, well, I also need to try and get to a higher perspective so I can see it more clearly. Because you can't solve a problem by the same consciousness that created it. So it's like, we have to get to a higher perspective.
Right. I wish you had like a whoa. that line, right? We just kind of passed by that line. Whoa. You can't solve a problem with the consciousness that created it. Woo! What a line. Sorry.
That's the mic drop moment.
That's that's sort of based on, there's a quote that's very similar to that. Like you can't solve a problem from the same level that created it, so
100%.
But I take it to the consciousness level.
True.
Yeah.
It's so true. And then we go deep. Now we can go down the rabbit hole, because now we get into like the subconscious mind versus the conscious. But that line right there, I think, was the key. Like when I think of Birkman, when I think of the coaching that you provide through the Birkman personality, like that answer right there. Whenever, for example, I always struggle with personal finances. Now I'm really good at business finances, which is really odd. You can ask James. Like I get obsessed with margins in business, but I never obsessed over margins in my personal finances. And I'm over here just making a ruckus, like a mess, right? It ended up happening That's like a weird word. I've never used the word ruckus. But what happened, like you said, a different level of consciousness. I started getting exposed to different people, started learning different information, started seeing myself as a wealthy man versus just a man that's living the moment. And I started doing these practices, and now I was telling James, like, I'm over here, like, okay, if I was a business, now I see myself as a business. That's the new consciousness that I provide. I'm like, now I look at my bank account and my relationship, my marriage as a business. I know it's weird to say, but like, okay, if we made money today, how much goes into tax? How much goes into profit? How much is it just to spend for, like, I look at it like software to scale, but for me, it's money to scale my relationship. Okay. Like now I started looking at it with that level of consciousness. And I've been able to make strides. So it's kind of cool what you said. It's can't fix the problem with the same level of consciousness. That is huge, 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 huge.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go for it. No, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
Angel, just I remembered, sort of when I was sort of doing my due diligence and sort of some homework before in prep for this, I was on your LinkedIn, and the quote that you have there, you never know yourself until you see yourself under pressure. So it's like, it can be very revealing, when we're tested and when we're challenged, and it comes back to choice. Like, who do you want to be in those situations? Who do you want to model to your team? What kind of leader
100%.
do you want to be? And so that's where the practice comes in. And so the Birkman is, again, it's like, it leads us down that path of how to become, sort of unlock that higher version of ourselves. Yeah.
Man, I know that we're going to call it, because if not, I'm going to have, like, my brain is already thinking of questions and subset questions and statements, but I think that's going to be more of a personal session. Maybe I'll have to do a one-on-one over here. But Michelle, I don't know if you have a question, James.
I think I would just, give a shout out of where people can find you. If they're wanting to learn more about Birkman, Profit First, or just you, Michelle, we'll link everything in the show notes. And where can people find you?
LinkedIn, or they're welcome to send an email to me, Michelle@expandyouredge.com, or on my website, there's a connect form, so I can fill that out. So a couple of different ways. Yeah. But yeah, just love meeting new people, and especially people that are sort of interested in sort of working on themselves, helping to make a difference and have an impact, through the work that they're doing. It's just, I just love it. I just love it.
Well, Michelle, don't leave after we end the podcast here, but thank you so much for being on the podcast. We truly appreciate it. It's so awesome. I'm obsessed with finding a better version of myself, right? Like, I have, like, this is my wedding ring, but it's actually like an Aura ring so that I can track my sleep. I
got one too.
Aura power. James.
Activated.
I know, right? James, we both took the Birkman and we both have Aura rings. We're going to get you an Aura ring and a Birkman test. That's the next step.
There you go.
No, but you're right. Like, I love finding a new version of myself. I know James loves doing that and pushing himself as well. So, like, whoever's listening to this, take this as get obsessed with what's in there, what's in your heart, what's in your mind, what you're capable of, because that's the only way you can challenge others. The other way, get them a Birkman personality test and get them out into their higher operating state. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
God bless.
Such a pleasure.